Strong as this killer.
If it was a pretty neck, you were probably going to be a victim.
And she was in the sex worker industry.
Some serial killers scream crazy from the moment you see them. Take Charles Manson, for example. Almost always, his expressions are weird, scary, and menacing. After all, he led a notorious cult. But some serial killers have a much higher kill count, and they blend into society without any difficulty. In fact, it's those that blend perfectly that keep on killing for decades without getting caught. This is the story of Samuel Little. When he was arrested in 2012, he was at a homeless shelter. He sat in a wheelchair and he suffered from diabetes. You might even be excused for feeling pity for such an old man. But then, he calmly sat down with the detectives and described in great detail how he took the lives of 93 women. That's right, 93. To this day, Little is the most prolific serial killer in the United States. How did he get away with murder for over half a century? Were the police slacking off, or was Little simply too smart to get caught? Let's dive into the story of the man who got away with 93 murders. A tough start. Samuel Little was born on June 7, 1940, in Reynolds, Georgia, a very small town where over half of the population lives in extreme poverty. In 1940, it wasn't any better, and Sam's family was indeed one of the poor ones. His mother was an illegal nighttime worker, and she gave birth to Sam in prison. When she got out, she abandoned him.
His mother was 16 when she was pregnant, and she was in the sex worker industry.
He talked about his mother. His mother had left him on the street corner when he was described it as being so young. He was almost a toddler.
Luckily, he was found and passed on to her parents. Sam thus grew up with his grandparents in Lorain, Ohio. As a child, he would cause a fair amount of ruckus and get into trouble. But one time, he stole a bite, and it led to a very dark turn in his life.
He went to reform school for stealing a bicycle. It's called Boys Industrial School in Ohio. His family will also tell me he was nothing but trouble even before he went there. Then he just got abused and abused and abused.
You know how hate leads to hate and violence leads to more violence? What he experienced in that school, Sam only wanted to do to others afterwards. He went on to high school at Hawthorne Junior High, but his performance was poor, to say the least. By now, he would spend most of his time fantasizing about strangling women and collecting true crime magazines with women being choked. At 16, he dropped out of high school. The same year, he was arrested for the first time for burglary. He was held in juvie, then released, then arrested again a few months later for breaking and entering. This is how he would live the rest of his life, committing crime after crime, sometimes getting caught, but most times dodging the law, at least when it came to murder.
I speak with his family. They ask me all the time, how did this happen? Why? Early childhood, sexual abuse, physical abuse.
In the late 1960s, Little went on to live with his mom in Florida. He worked at the County Department of Sanitation and also worked at a local cemetery. Slowly but surely, his petty crimes would turn into something much darker and much too difficult for the police to track. A transient reign of terror. Between 1964 and 1975, Samuel Little was arrested 26 times across 11 different states. Armed robbery, violation, theft, solicitation of a nighttime worker, shoplifting, DUI, aggravated assault on a police officer, and the list goes on. He spent a fair amount of time in prison, but not quite enough. When he wasn't held under arrest, he was most of the time drifting from state to state, and he was homeless.
You were a traveling man all your life, right? How did you make money to buy cars, shoplifting?
But there was a much bigger problem. When he wasn't in jail, he was killing people. Vulnerable people like illegal workers, substance abuse addicts, and mentally challenged people. Somehow, they all had a strange similarity to his mother.
The type of victims that he selected and his relationship with his mother, the victims that he chose were very vulnerable. They were sex workers. Some of them were addicted to drugs. These were low-income minority neighborhoods.
Just listen to how Little talks about one of his victims.
She was an alcoholic, and she couldn't catch her trick no more. She was in a position where that was couldn't do nothing no more.
But he didn't just feel rage or disgust for these poor women, he also felt lust.
It might be somebody that you want to have sex with or somebody that you might want to kill.
Sam Little started his reign of terror in 1970. Still, every time he would get arrested, it would be for a smaller crime. Except in 1982, when he was arrested in Mississippi and charged with the murder of 22-year-old Melinda Rose Laprie. She'd gone missing in September that year, and the police were becoming ever more suspicious of Little. And still, even with Little under arrest, the grand jury refused to indict him for Melinda's killing. However, he was then extradited to Florida and tried for another murder, 26-year-old Patricia Ann Mount. Her body has been found also in September 1982, and witnesses had testified to Little being the last person to spend time with her. But due to mistrust of witness testimonies, Samuel Little was acquitted of the crime in January 1984. Until 2005, he would take some 50 other lives. Imagine being the judge who acquitted Little back in the 1980s. For decades, Little cornered illegal workers and addicts, beat them, and strangled them to death.
He actually told police that he found it actually satisfying to rape and kill women. He was not going to stop.
I was squeezing hard enough for the breath could be cut off.
There was only one exception.
I grabbed her by the legs and pulled her to the water. That's the only one that I ever killed by drowning.
For the rest of his 92 victims, Little used the same MO, which is why he got harder and harder to catch.
He did this same MO over and over again. He got very good at it. The prosecutors and the police were able to actually pin a case on him until he left his DNA.
And as you probably know already, DNA evidence wasn't really a thing until the 21st century. Plus, he would move from state to state, so crimes weren't piling up in a city or region. To the police, all of these murders seemed disparate. But in 2012, Californian police made a fateful decision.
California actually had a case where they had run DNA on a cold case. DNA came back to an identical person in Sam Little.
The confessions. So, on September 5th, 2012, Sam Little was tracked down to a Christian homeless center in Louisville, Kentucky. He was arrested and sent to California to face a narcotics charge. The officers also suspected him of at least 3 murders, but Little was adamant he had nothing to do with that. However, when they showed him the DNA lab results, his demeanor changed 180 degrees.
You're so valuable to society at this point, I think.
Oh, am I? I hope I can help somebody.
Notice the sarcasm in the officer's sentence? Little was being sarcastic too, and arrogant. Like many psychopathic killers, he was proud of what he had done. And now, he finally had a chance to share his terrible deeds with the rest of the world.
This guy definitely was ready to talk as soon as he knew that he wasn't going to be receiving the death penalty.
I had this black chick up in the car. Just got through killing her.
In a few hours, Samuel Little turned a few dozen cold cases into active cases.
I'll go back to the same city sometime and pluck me another grape. How many grapes? Y'all got on the vine here. Sure. That one, right?
There's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Then he started talking about his girlfriend, Jean. Now, remember how his victims had things in common with his mother? Well, so did his girlfriend. For starters, her age.
Me and my old lady, Jean was, she was 70 some years. She about 30 years older than me.
Sam had met Jean while in prison in 1970. He was 30 years old and she was 60. She was a prolific shoplifter, and once they got out of jail, they were like Bonnie and Clyde. They would steal every single day and night, and Little would disappear to a secluded area where he would take another innocent life.
She's a shoplifter, and I was the driver, and we'd go all over the country, everywhere. I'd stop in places overnight in the motels. She's an old lady, you know, and I'd go out the street looking for a girl. That's how I got around so many places.
Sam Little and Jean Dorsey were together for 18 years until Jean's death in 1988. It's unknown whether Jean knew her boyfriend was a prolific serial killer as well as her fellow shoplifter. Either way, he benefited in a very creepy way from this relationship. Jean was a mother figure and a bad role model that he wanted around him. It was almost as if he justified his actions through the fact that Jean was doing bad stuff too.
I kind of wonder if she was this maternal replacement figure. And so there was this respect and adoration towards her.
Except shoplifting isn't quite as bad as killing people.
Because of her, you were able to kind of go around, right? Because she had the money coming in.
Yeah,
right? She knew you were going out with women.
Yeah, she knew.
She didn't know that there was killing going on.
No, she didn't know I was going that far.
Little proceeded to talk the officers through every victim he remembered, and he remembered an awful lot, considering his first victim died in 1970, 42 years prior to his arrest.
First victim I had was in by January, February of 1970.
Okay.
Over in Miami, Coconut Grove, Miami.
Yeah. First killing. Did you know that you wanted to kill her?
Yeah. Yeah, I had a strong desire to kill her.
In 1966, he had been arrested for assaulting another woman. By then, he already hated prison, and he was determined not to go back. So after that event, he made a promise to himself.
I believe that was the impetus for him to say, I will not leave a witness alive again.
Little also told the cops how he chose his victims. Of course, their vulnerability mattered a lot. They were easy targets. They had little defense, and nobody would come looking for them if they disappeared. Then there was the physical aspect. Remember, his MO was with his hands.
You pick the ones that you think you're going to kill first?
No, if the one depends on how the neck looks. Got a smooth neck and turned. As a child, I got attracted to
the neck part.
Yeah.
Little was a sexual psychopath. He was aroused by the people he wanted to kill, and taking their lives gave him pleasure. The very worst kind, right?
When he put their hands around our throat, he wanted them to swallow so he could feel their Adam's apple. If it was a pretty neck, you were probably going to be a victim. If you had an ugly neck, maybe not so much.
Apparently, Little engaged in choking his partners during intercourse for years before committing the actual murders. And the first time he felt attracted to necks was in kindergarten, when he remembers seeing his teacher touching her neck in an attractive way. It was a lifelong obsession that one day became a gruesome reality. And when he started, he couldn't stop.
It was easy, and it was something then that he didn't want to stop doing.
You just went out of control, I guess.
And then after that, it was...
build up crescendo.
Then, when he was 65, Sam Little mysteriously stopped his decades-long killing spree. Ironically, it was just like he retired from his job.
That's a career. He still had the same urges to kill women. But physically, he was failing. He knew that he might get caught if he continued to try to physically kill a woman, and then, more importantly, tried to get rid of their body.
Having fun. There's an even darker side of the story, if you can believe it.
While we were dancing, she says, you want to go riding after this, after this party's over? So she had arm in arm, walking to the car.
In his mind, Samuel Little danced and partied with these women. But in reality, he beat and violated them. Still, he never said those words.
He's a man that did not want to admit that he raped anyone. In his own mind, he wanted to be known as a killer rather than somebody that would have to take by force sex from a woman.
According to Little, he loves women. He doesn't hate them, and he doesn't hate his mom. He simply can't see the clear connection between his mom abandoning him, her line of work, and all of the women he hurt and killed as an adult. Or he doesn't want to see it.
Fourth Little Rock. Tell me what that girl looked like.
Oh man, I loved her.
Yeah, it's not exactly love when you violate and strangle someone with your bare hands.
And then I would, then we went further, and I choked her to death.
He told the detective these stories as if he was recalling his prom night. The way he said it made the horrific events sound like both parties had a lot of fun. They just went a bit further than most, he said.
He was so attached to this idea that he didn't hurt them, and God made him the way he is. God gave me this twisted desire where sex and death got all twisted up inside of me like a pretzel.
That was my weakness. I guess I never could get that out of my mind, mixed up with sex.
He even pointed to the Bible and said all the things he was doing are in there too. The detectives were appalled to listen to all of Little's horrific descriptions of his 93 murders, but they were also amazed at his memory. How was he remembering details from 40 years before?
Las Vegas. Describe the Las Vegas victim.
That was in 93. She was kind of thin, dark skinned, about 40 years old. She was out there hustling.
How tall was she?
She was about 5'5", 5'3".
Not only did he remember details most people wouldn't, but he would relive those moments full-heartedly.
Way over there behind a furniture factory. Parked right there. And if I don't get this out.
He even told police officers where he dumped her body in detail.
Steps go down, led down to the basement, but they had a rail around it too, where you couldn't fall down them steps. You had to go around to the steps. So I threw her down the steps.
According to the prosecutor, Little's great memory was the only trophy he needed from his victims.
Mr. Little had a very keen memory. It was almost photographic. He never took trophies. His trophy was up here in his mind. He would relive in his jail cell and his holding cell each of these killings over and over again.
Samuel Little then proceeded to draw sketches of each of his victims, all the while smiling as he reminisced about their faces, as if he was thinking about high school sweethearts.
He remembered some of the names of the victims. He remembered wardrobe, he remembered buttons on some of their clothing and zippers. This went back all the way to the 1970s. It takes a special type of intelligence to have that ability.
He even drew blood around some of the women's eyes. This is something that happens to the body during strangulation. Now, after confessing to the murders and drawing his victims, Little wanted to speak to his interviewers about their personal lives, simply out of curiosity. He never really had a normal life, and he wanted to know what that was like.
Our conversations veered from sports, boxing, my kids, my meatloaf. He liked to hear what it was like to actually be a human being. It made him feel like one for a minute. And then he would talk about murdering.
In September 2014, Samuel Little was tried for 3 murders, those that the police had clear DNA links to. On September 25th, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Then, in November 2018, Little sat down with more detectives and gave them more details that could convict him further. He eventually received 4 life sentences. He knew this wouldn't make any difference to his time in prison. He just wanted the world to know what he had done. Out of the 93 murders he confessed to, the FBI confirmed at least 60 as being committed by Samuel Little.
So far, from my understanding, 62 different female bodies have actually been identified as his killings. And I'm sure that there are more bodies out there.
There's a continuing investigation still going on with the ones that were never identified. And we know some of these weren't listed as homicides, they were listed as either overdose deaths or they fell off a ravine.
While he spoke to the detectives, Little also expressed some remorse, as strange as that might sound.
I wish the hell I didn't, but it can't be turned back. Not only hurts, but the more that I'm grateful for it, I'm constantly saying I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Well, for this family, they have closure now. You've confessed to it. You've told us what you did, how you did it, why you did it, and I personally thank you for that.
On December 30th, 2020, Sam Little died from cancer-related complications. Now, it's harder to link him to the other 31 murders without his memories, but the police have not stopped the investigations, nor will they stop until they find all 93, and perhaps even more bodies. But even with all the details shared, there are more questions than answers when it comes to Samuel Little. How could a homeless man with no money and no education dodge the law for 40-something years? How could he get arrested for petty theft but not for murder over and over again? How did he believe that he had fun with all of these women? And how could a man that took almost 100 lives feel remorse? Well, it's up to you to find an answer. Hey, thanks for watching. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more blood-chilling cases. See you next time and stay safe.